Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So I've been having a lot of fun with Omni-Man in Mortal Kombat 1 over the past week or so. And you know, as I was playing, one specific question started to nag at me. Could any of these characters actually defeat Omni-Man? Look, I'll fully admit that my knowledge of Invincible is pretty limited, but even I know that in this home series, there's not a lot of things that can bring down Omni-Man. That's why in today's video, I'm going to be looking at the Mortal Kombat 1 roster to determine who would be able to actually defeat Omni-Man in combat, as well as who would lose to the Viltrumite. I'm going to be discussing both the base roster of characters as well as the DLC fighters, given all of them are either returning Mortal Kombat characters or guest fighters with tons of reference material to pull from. I'll be grouping these characters into 4 separate categories: no chance, slight chance, great chance, and equals. Some rules that I want to establish before the video starts properly is that I'm only going to be looking at the Mortal Kombat 1 versions of these characters. So, for example, if a character had an ability in a previous game that they no longer have in this game, I won't be taking it into consideration when it comes to the ranking system. Also, just because some character defeats or gets defeated by certain characters, that doesn't automatically make them a weaker character in my eyes. For example, General Shao getting defeated by Raiden in the story mode doesn't necessarily mean I'll be ranking Raiden higher than the War General. I'm more looking at each character in a vacuum and seeing if their combat skills and unique abilities would be enough to bring down the Viltrumite warrior. Another thing to keep in mind is that this is all just my opinion. If you think my list is wrong and that certain characters would beat Omni-Man or get beaten by him, I encourage you to let me know down in the comments. But with all that said and done, it's about time we got this show on the road. Let's begin the video by looking at characters who would absolutely have no chance at beating Omni-Man. First up in the no chance category, I unfortunately have to put Johnny Cage. Look, I love Johnny as much as the next guy, but at the end of the day, all he has going for him is an extensive history of martial arts training. And unfortunately, that's not going to be enough to take down a man who is essentially a god. It's a shame Johnny doesn't seem to have his green energy powers yet, because if he did, I definitely would have put him in the great chance category. Possibly even the equals category, as his past self was able to use said powers to defeat Shinnok. But as it stands, Johnny unfortunately has to be the first to go. Next up on the list, we have Peacemaker. Much like Johnny Cage, Peacemaker is severely outclassed in almost every single regard by Omni-Man. I think he'd survive slightly longer than Cage, however, given the extensive combat and firearms training he received from his father growing up. Not to mention, he probably picked up a lot of useful experience being part of the Suicide Squad, but again, he's just a man, whereas Omni-Man is a god. For this next section, I'm going to be grouping Li Mei and Tanya together, as I feel they're both pretty similar in terms of their roles and combat abilities. Both of them serve the Outworld royal family as enforcers in one way or another, and are therefore highly trained to deal with all sorts of unpredictable threats. Not to mention, they both have magical powers that allow them to manifest Green Lantern-like constructs, with Li Mei summoning a dragon and Tanya summoning a flurry of fists. So in that regard, I think they would survive slightly longer against Omni-Man than Johnny Cage and Peacemaker, but with that being said, I still feel like Omni-Man's abilities and resilience far outmatch their own, which is why I feel they would ultimately fall to the Viltrumite warrior. Much like Li Mei and Tanya, I'm going to be grouping Kitana and Mileena together, given they're, well, sisters, and because they most likely went through the same kind of combat training throughout their lives. While I may have put these two characters in the no chance category, I don't think they would go down quite as easily as the previous characters listed. Kitana's proficiency with her fans and Mileena's Tarkat disease, something that can turn her into a vicious monster, would, in my opinion, allow them to go toe-to-toe with Omni-Man for quite a bit. But again, much like the rest of the characters in this tier, Kitana and Mileena suffer from the fact that they're merely human, or I guess in this case, Edenian, but that's semantics. Yeah, they might have thousands of years of combat experience, but that's hardly gonna matter when they're facing a man who can quite literally grind their bones to dust. And finally, the last character I'm gonna be putting in the no chance category is gonna be Reiko. Reiko probably went through the most hardship out of anyone in this tier, having to fend for his life since he was a literal child. Eventually studying combat under the tutelage of General Shao, Reiko is easily one of the most skilled, most hardened characters in the MK1 roster, something that even Omni-Man seems to recognize. I think his penchant for war and the fighting experience he gained from General Shao would lead Reiko to lasting the longest against Omni-Man. While I still believe he would ultimately die by the Viltrumite's hands, there's no doubt in my mind that Reiko would go out in a blaze of glory. But with that being said, we can finally move on to the slight chance category, starting things off with Kung Lao. I feel like Kung Lao's commitment to his Shaolin training really saves him from almost being put in the no chance category. Throughout the MK1 story mode, you can really tell that Kung Lao is truly dedicated to the fight against evil, even if his massive ego may make it seem like he's only in it for the glory. While I ultimately believe that Omni-Man would probably prevail over Kung Lao, I think he'd have a slight chance at winning over the Viltrumite, so long as he keeps his ego under control. Next up, we have Baraka. Much like Melina, I feel Baraka's Tarkat disease would give him a slight edge against Omni-Man, due to his ability to turn him into an uncontrollable, bloodthirsty monster. Baraka has been shown to be a proficient fighter with the use of his arm blades, so I can realistically see him giving Omni-Man a run for his money. At the same time, however, this could turn out to be a double-edged sword, as I can easily see Omni-Man exploiting Baraka's weaknesses should he lose control of himself. While we have yet to see how Takeda performs in MK1, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that he most likely acts and fights similar to the character we all know and love from Mortal Kombat X. So with that in mind, the character would come equipped with training from both the Shirai Ryu and Kenshi under his belt. That's not to mention that his whips would most likely give Takeda the ability to keep his distance from Omni-Man. I am concerned that this version of Takeda will be far less experienced in the field than the one from MKX, which is why I can see him being taken down by Omni-Man relatively easily should he ever let his guard down. I'm going to be grouping Smoke, Scorpion, and Sub-Zero together, as I feel all three of these guys have an equal chance at defeating Omni-Man, given their ninja moves and abilities. Smoke has a lot of great tools at his disposal that could give him a leg up in the fight against Omni-Man. His ability to vanish in the thin air, which then allows him to ambush opponents, would be a great way to confuse and wear down Omni-Man. But at the same time, I think that Omni-Man's reflexes are far too quick for Smoke to counter, which is why he would probably meet his end as soon as Omni-Man caught on to what he was doing. Scorpion's proficiency with bladed weapons and his ability to conjure up fire at will makes him an extremely dangerous opponent, even to someone as skilled as Omni-Man. I think that if Scorpion is able to keep the pressure on Omni-Man with his pyromancy abilities, then there's a pretty good chance he'd be able to take him down. But at the same time, his role as second in command of the Lin Kuei leads me to believe that the character might be lacking the experience needed to properly keep up with Omni-Man. Though speaking of which, I feel Sub-Zero probably has the best chance at defeating Omni-Man out of anyone in this trio. He's definitely the most ruthless of the three characters here. He's highly skilled in hand-to-hand combat, and his ability to freeze opponents at will is unparalleled. Not to mention his desire to rule Outworld matches Omni-Man's desire to conquer Earth. So I can see him trying to do whatever it takes to win against Omni-Man. But there's just one slight issue. If Omni-Man can survive the inhumane cold of space, then there's a good chance he'll have no problem overcoming Sub-Zero's cryomancy powers. Now that we got the ninja trio out of the way, it's time we talk about Kenshi. Kenshi's proficiency with his sword, his telekinetic abilities, and daredevil-like senses would aid him pretty well in his fight against Omni-Man. Well, for a while at least. I think the area that Kenshi suffers the most in is his reaction time, something that's definitely not helped by his blindness. Given how fast Omni-Man is, I can see him absolutely steamrolling Kenshi, should he not react in time. And finally, closing out the slight chance category is going to be Natara. I don't have much to say about Natara beyond the fact that I feel like her unique vampire anatomy would benefit her well in the fight against Omni-Man. I can see her desire to feed both motivating her to fight her hardest against Omni-Man, but also throwing her emotions off balance, leading to Omni-Man gaining a swift victory against her. Alright, now we're moving on to the Great Chance category. Starting off with Reptile. Reptile is one of the most unique fighters on the Mortal Kombat 1 roster, being able to shapeshift between a human form and beast form. I think the two biggest advantages Reptile has over Omni-Man is his ability to turn invisible and his acidic saliva. Reptile could use his invisibility to sneak up on Omni-Man, or, should he ever get backed into a corner, use it to escape the battle. And look, I know that Omni-Man has fought invisible opponents in his home series, but they were using cloaking technology, which I feel is a far cry from natural invisibility. Anyways, Reptile's acidic saliva seems to be pretty potent, no matter who you are. So even if Omni-Man was able to resist it for a while, I feel like it would eventually eat away at him. Rain is next up on the list. While he may not be a demigod in this timeline, it's clear that his role as a high mage and his ability to control water and summon storms makes him one of MK1's more deadlier characters. I mean, he literally drowned thousands of people in the blink of an eye in Havoc's tower ending. You don't get much more deadlier than that. But with all that being said, I think in order for Rain to beat Omni-Man, he would really have to kick things into overdrive in order to stand against the Viltrumite's one-of-a-kind anatomy. If he can survive flying through space, there's no doubt in my mind he can survive being underwater for extended periods of time. Rain would have to use every tool in his kit in order to defeat Omni-Man. Next up on the list, we have Havoc. I feel that Havoc has one of the biggest advantages over Omni-Man compared to any other characters in the game. That being his insane healing factor. This healing factor is the reason why he can do all those weird blood magic attacks and not, die instantly. While the game doesn't make it clear whether or not this healing factor only applies to damage Havoc does to himself, I'm just going to go ahead and assume it applies to damage Havoc takes in general. Which, now that I think about it, that's probably the reason why he didn't die after Scorpion shoved his face into molten metal. Anyways, Omni-Man would have his work cut out for him when it comes to defeating Havoc. If he doesn't destroy Havoc's whole body all at once, I imagine he could just grow it back like he's Wolverine or Daredevil. Ashra's quest to purge the evil from her soul has made her one of Mortal Kombat 1's most skilled fighters. I think the fact that she's so human-looking in appearance, something that is a direct result of her killing Netherrealm demons, is proof enough that she could easily go up against someone like Omni-Man. And that's all I have to say about Ashra. Look, I've got like 9 more characters to talk about, so give me a break. While Raiden may not be the god of thunder in this timeline, he's clearly just as skillful of a combatant. Remember, he won the Mortal Kombat tournament, beating out characters like Kodo, Shiva, and Motaro. His combat capabilities, mastery of lightning, and pure heart essentially makes him the direct opposite of Omni-Man. Raiden, much like Kung Lao, is one of those characters who would be willing to give his life if it meant opposing Omni-Man's oppression. This is one of the few characters I'm not entirely sure if I placed him in the right category. It really is a 50-50 outcome, so let me know if I should have placed him higher up on the list in the comments. When it comes to a hypothetical battle between Omni-Man and Homelander, a lot of people like to just completely disregard Homelander and automatically assume that Omni-Man would come out the victor. While I am of the opinion that, yes, Omni-Man would still probably win, I don't think it would be such an easy victory. Homelander is one of the most powerful supers from his home series, if not the most powerful. As such, he has a lot of the same traits and abilities that Omni-Man has, including his ability to fly, move at inhuman speeds, lift heavy objects with ease, etc. Unlike Omni-Man, Homelander has the ability to shoot laser beams out of his eyes like Superman, so in that regard, he has a slight advantage over the Viltrumite. I think the thing that would ultimately lead to Homelander's downfall, however, would be his massive ego. If you've seen The Boys, you know that Homelander sees himself as the second coming of Christ. I can see Omni-Man exploiting this weakness of his, making him believe he has come out the victor of their battle, before swiftly eliminating him once his guard is down. And at the top of the Great Chance category is Sindel. One of the few weaknesses that Viltrumites seem to have is that their ears are highly susceptible to sound, given the fact they're so sensitive. Sindel's signature Banshee-like scream would easily exploit this weakness, giving her a huge advantage over Omni-Man. Even if Omni-Man is able to work his way around her screaming attacks, Sindel still has her hand-to-hand combat skills, as well as her hair, to defend herself. I know it kind of sounds like I should be putting her in the equals category, given she's basically one big Omni-Man anti-weapon, but I just don't think she's quite there yet. I mean, after all, she literally died, so she obviously has some flaws in her fighting technique. Starting off the equals category is going to be Ermac, or more specifically, King Jared. It's been a constant throughout the Mortal Kombat franchise that Ermac gets more powerful in relation to the amount of souls inhabiting his body. And not only does this version of Ermac possess King Jared's soul, he also possesses all the souls found in the Living Forest, on top of eventually acquiring Sindel's soul. So with all that being said, Ermac is kind of a freaking beast, despite what the story mode would have you believe. I can easily see him not only holding his own against Omni-Man, but coming out on top, especially if Jared and Sindel's souls work in tandem with one another. Next up, I'm going to be grouping together Shang Tsung and Quan Chi, not just because it's an obvious Deadly Alliance reference, but because the two are quite similar in nature. Their mastery of sorcery and deceptive nature makes them some of the most formidable characters in the Mortal Kombat franchise, formidable enough to go up against the likes of Omni-Man. Shang Tsung's biggest advantage against Omni-Man would obviously be his ability to copy his superpowers. Viltrumites are naturally weak to one another's attacks, meaning that if Shang Tsung was able to gain Omni-Man's strengths and speed, there's a high likelihood he'd be able to finish him. While Quan Chi might not have Shang Tsung's ability to copy attacks, he's still just as powerful thanks to his knowledge of necromancy and soul magic. In the right circumstance, I can see Quan Chi completely overwhelming Omni-Man with the undead. And with Shang Tsung and Quan Chi out of the way, we move on to the top 3 Mortal Kombat 1 characters that could defeat Omni-Man, starting out with General Shao. While he may not be the supreme ruler of Outworld we all know and love in this timeline, his accomplishments are just as impressive. General Shao's tower ending shows him battling and taming Onaga, the Dragon King. A truly remarkable feat given what we know about the previous timeline's Onaga. So it kind of goes without saying that General Shao is more than capable of not only standing up to Omni-Man, but killing him as well. Plus, should Omni-Man back him into a corner, Shao could unleash the aforementioned Onaga against the Viltrumite. The second to last character we're going to be talking about in the equals tier is the god of fire himself, Liu Kang. Look, it should be pretty obvious why Liu Kang is placed this high up on the list. This version of the Chosen One is, without a doubt, the most powerful interpretation of the character yet, being the literal creator of all living life in the universe. As such, he's had ages to perfect his fighting technique, something that obviously can't be said about Omni-Man. The two fighters are, well, equals. But we need to address the elephant in the room, that being the fact that Liu Kang's actions in the story mode made him a mortal being, meaning that if Omni-Man was able to kill the god of fire, he'd stay dead. But what if that wasn't a problem? On that note, let's move on to the final character in the equals category, as well as the final character we're going to be talking about in today's video, Geras. Simply put, Geras is just as skilled of a fighter as Liu Kang is, with the added benefit that he's an immortal being. Should Omni-Man somehow manage to defeat the time construct, Geras could just simply come back to life and fight him again and again and again until he finally kills him. Though speaking of time constructs, Geras' ability to manipulate time would very obviously give him a huge advantage over the Viltrumite. Whichever way you look at it, Geras not only measures up to Omni-Man, but he easily outclasses him, which is why, in my opinion, he's the Mortal Kombat 1 character that could defeat Omni-Man. But with that being said, I'm going to bring this video to a close. Thank you for watching. Did you agree or disagree with any of the placements in this video? If so, let me know in the comments. If you like this video and want to see more Mortal Kombat and crossover based content in the future, go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Until next time, I'll see you in the next one.